All right, so we're going to move into the last portion of our Healthcare Privacy and Security Symposium today. And this last part is a panel discussion. We're going to mix it up here a little bit as we conclude. And we have a panel, a session we're going to do. We have a panelist consisting of 6 individuals, 3 that you've already heard from, 3 of our speakers from earlier today. And we have 3 additional individuals who will be part of the panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and ask all the panelists to go ahead and step up to the podium. And I will introduce the 3 folks that have not been introduced yet who's on this panel. So if you're on the panel here, you will step up to the podium, and then lastly I'll introduce our moderator as well.
I'm the only one that doesn't have my name highlighted in the program.
Well, we were going to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I thought.
Well, you're highlighted on the screen.
Are you hinting at something there?
Don't worry about it. Everybody.
It's going to be a bit of a tight squeeze here on the podium. So if you bear with us a minute here, we'll
I'll give
get
some
everybody
color in
settled
the
in.
middle.
No, you need me to do that.
I hear you.
Yeah, don't
Okay,
leave me
so
in the
to
middle
my
of this one.
far right is Eric Red. As you see there on the screen, some highlights from his background, his credentials. He began his career in IT in 1974, programming punch cards in Fortran and COBOL, and continued in application development for a decade. Moved into network security operations in 1992, and as a network and security architect, and provided the design and project management for many of the world's largest hotel and casinos. He was recruited to provide audit services in 2002 and managed the 2004 Sarbanes-Oxley testing for a major pharmaceutical distribution company. And lastly, presently, he's an Associate Director of Audit, Risk Management, and Compliance at UnitedHealth Care, managing regulatory audits and providing compliance oversight since 2005. So that's Eric, far in there. Next, we have Brenda Rose. Brenda is also from Cedars-Sinai Health System. Brenda is a certified information security professional, so she holds a CISSP credential. Currently, she holds a position of Enterprise Information Services and IT Security Manager for Cedars-Sinai. She has 25 plus years of diverse experience in technology and healthcare industry sectors, and proficient in all facets of information assurance and many areas of regulatory compliance, including HIPAA, PCI, SOX, and frameworks such as ISO. And lastly, her experience includes leading and managing a variety of assignments, from conducting security controls review and risk assessments, security policy development, business continuity planning, regulatory and security standards compliance. And then the third individual you haven't met yet is Jim Brady. I call him Jim, you call him James, but he goes by both. Dr. James Brady is the area CIO at Kaiser Permanente, Orange County. He oversees the IT facets of for 262-bed Anaheim and 150-bed Irvine medical centers and 22 medical offices, and you see the numbers there. Previously, Jim was the CISO and Director of Technical Services at Hawaii Health Systems in Honolulu, the state's 5th largest employee and nation's 4th largest community hospital system. Before working in Hawaii, he was an integral part of the IT transformation and deploying EPIC as Enterprise Information Services Systems Manager at Cedars-Sinai, and he was the one that was, by the way, instrumental in getting Dr. Soohoo and along with Brenda to participate in this session, and so very appreciative of Jim's efforts to help us put this program together. Jim is also the incoming president for the Southern California chapter of HIMSS. So he's got a lot of work ahead of him. So congratulate him and send him give him best wishes as well. That's gonna be a lot of work. So we appreciate everyone on the panel today and for your contribution. I want to introduce the moderator now. And so Cindy Stamer has been a big contributor to this program, this event, along with other programs that HIMSS has put together in the past. She brings a significant amount of experience in advising and assisting healthcare providers, health plans, healthcare technology, business associates, and other healthcare clients about privacy, data security, investigations, enforcement, other compliance areas. She's been recognized as in the international's who's of professionals for her work as an attorney, consultant, and author to a wide range of healthcare, technology, financial services, insurance, and other organizations. And lastly, she helps health industry and other clients to develop and use legal and other strategies to manage legal, operational, and other risks to enhance business operational effectiveness and to re-engineer people, processes, culture, and meet other goals. So that's a mouthful. Cindy has already been instrumental with this summit. She taught a class yesterday. Some of you might have gone to it on HIPAA law, HIPAA privacy and security laws. And so she has been already busy as part of this summit. So that being said, let me go ahead and turn the mic over to Cindy Stamer and let her run with today's panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the conference. I know I have, and I want to thank all the panelists. It's a brave thing not only to come and talk, and particularly when you've had to deal with some of the challenges, makes it even more difficult. But it's an even braver thing to agree to participate on a panel where you're about to be Stamerized, because none of the panelists have been given the questions in advance. On the other hand, what you don't get to participate in that people like I do is in the planning of the panels. And the reason I love to do this when you have great minds is because it is the best way. It's where you get all the best stuff. So before we start, I just want you to acknowledge, and when we leave today, be sure to really give them a high five and a hug, because they're not just sharing in a prefab way where they've been able to manage and know in advance, but they're basically participating as I do on a day-by-day basis in a pop quiz. And my goal in encouraging this, it really comes from something that we do in the conferences out in Washington when I work with the government leaders and others, is we have a habit of fireside chats. And some of the best things come from this bringing of these minds together. So our goal today is to try to not really manage the conversation and just have a prefab thing, but actually let you understand why these people have their jobs and tap into that energy by talking about some dimensions really that have come from me listening, just like you did today, and then saying, ooh, I have this question. And saying, I really would like to ask them all. So there's some themes that I heard today, and they came in different ways. We kind of talked about the emerging way that we're securing identity. We talked about the current obligation, both from a business standpoint and a legal standpoint, the challenges of the technology, the challenges of the budget, the challenge of managing the people, and the challenging of managing the people that tell you have to manage the people, and keeping your job while you do it. And if I was going to say that in a nutshell, whenever I talk to you all here or somewhere else, is the challenge of your job. That is your job. Would you agree with that? So what I thought we would do today is just maybe go along those dynamics, because I hear some themes about it, but I also find so often some of the most important things that I can share is not what I know as a lawyer, but what I'm blessed to be shared with me, because I work with great people like this, and some of the best things they know are the questions we never ask them. So I'm going to try to see if, even though they've not been pre-warmed up and pre-warned, and so to start with that, I'm going to ask you, which do you think is more difficult? Managing the data or managing the management to give you the tools to manage the data? Doctor?
Well, I think it's probably probably a no-brainer to say it's managing the managers that manage the tools. Because, you know, it's there are lots of ways of managing data. The challenge is putting together the presentation and catching senior management and convincing them that that's something that needs a focus.
What do you think, and I want you all to contribute, but I've just asked this follow-up question because obviously you've had a very difficult series of challenges both by the nature of the organization and the events you all have had. What do you think, if you were talking to people struggling with that management, what do you think are the tools beyond the technology knowledge where you got the best skill development to learn that other than the School of Hard Knocks?
That's hard to say. I think mostly it's just learning the hard way. You go up, you make a presentation, you get shot down. You know, we've got a CIO who has this laser focus and he can zero in on the one defect in your presentation. He'll find it and he'll just hang you on that. And so I think, you know, after getting shot down 5 or 6 or 7 times, then you sort of learn what to do. The other trick, though, is to develop some tools that you have in your back pocket. And so then when the right time comes, you can pull it out. Like the laptop encryption is a good example. You know, in the back of my mind, I knew that was something we were going to have to do. But it wasn't until that one laptop got lost in China, and I said, oh, and by the way, here's the proposal that we have for laptop encryption. No problem getting it through that time.
You know, there's some interesting things. Are many people here CISMs from ISACA? No? CISM is a certification for a security manager, and I for the last few years have been on an international committee that selects questions they're going to be asking the certification. And one of the questions that came up last year, and I had to write it down because it just blew me away, because I come from audit. And audit, we do things a certain way. The question was, when you've determined that you need, your organization needs a special piece of software or hardware to really protect your environment, and your department lead denies the request, how do you proceed? The correct answer was develop relationships so you can go around that person to get it through his supervisor or her supervisor, which to me blew me away. That to me would be getting fired. But that's where we stand in security management today. It is so immature that we're training people to, hey, go around your boss because you need it so bad it's better for the company. That's what we have to solve. And it comes down to communication and maturing of this process, because if I did that in audit, I would be looking for a new job tomorrow. But that, I'm told by people in the security management field, that's a common strategy.
What's actually called up the ladder reporting.
It seems nuts to me that, because I'm big on chain of.
But I agree with you, and that's the dilemma, because what happens, and I know Jim's got some comments, I know you probably all do, but the constant theme is not that you don't know what needs to be done, but getting it done. And I think this is a good, to the point, and part of what we talked about a lot yesterday. We really didn't we didn't cover the HIPAA basics at all. You all know that. But this is what's fascinating, is the School of Hard Knocks. And so I think that's quite telling. And Jim, I know you've got some.
Yeah, I was just going to add to something that, to complement what Eric said, and then what Spencer said. Really, you know, there's, as was mentioned in the keynote this morning, that, you know, a lot of Target didn't even have a CISO. I'm just getting connected more to the business and kind of what they're doing, and instead of only the security and only the technology piece, and just seeing the security professional as that kind of a person where you get in there with the business, establish relationships, begin to talk with them. Obviously, you know, an easy thing an organization can do and should do annually is do a risk assessment, but you know that can provide data. You can give them information about all the different bad things that are happening, and people actually will at the top start realizing that, you know, we need to be a little bit more proactive rather than waiting for something bad to happen, and they kind of, you know, they kind of begrudgingly give a little bit more money to security. So really, it's in addition to focusing on the technical and the security components, is really developing those relationships with the people that make those decisions and getting them to buy in. So you have to be a little bit of a salesman or woman, you know, in my opinion, in this in this business. And I've only been at Kaiser for about 8 months, but they're really relationship driven. I mean, there's huge amounts of executives there, and you really got to work your way around and message what you want to be established. So that's my comment.
Brenda, do you have a thought you wanted to add?
To add on to what Jim's saying, I also think that education of management as you're selling it, because I find that even when we're providing audit reports, as Eric mentioned, you have to educate the management on what they're seeing. The technology, they don't speak the same language that you do. And so it really is trying to put it in their language so that they can grasp it. I don't think they want to say no, they just don't understand it enough to say yes fully. So that commitment requires some education.
That's why I'm a good bridge, because I don't pay for this hair.
Right. So I want to add to that. One tactic that we've found very useful is you make good friends with your internal audit folks. And take them out to lunch and say, oh, by the way, these are some things that you might want to look at and focus on. And so you can use that to drive their audits. And then as that drives the audits, you can sort of steer it towards solving a problem that you haven't been able to get traction on. So I think we've been successful with that in a couple of initiatives that we've undertaken, where because that audit report goes to the board, once it hits the board, it gets a lot of attention. So there was one initiative that I think Brenda and I were trying to drive for 2 years?
Yes.
Well over 2 years, we got absolutely no traction from any of the senior management. Mm-hmm. It showed up on an external risk assessment. We had somebody come in and do a risk assessment, and we made sure they saw that and highlighted it. Worked with their internal audit folks to make sure they saw that and highlighted it, and next thing we knew, it's a board issue.
It still goes on. One of the big keys all through this has been communication. For those people that worked on Y2K, we spent years to get things Y2K ready. And what happened right after Y2K was implemented? We were pilloried. We wasted millions and millions of dollars because nothing happened. We weren't smart enough as to professionals to stand up on the soapbox and say, we saved you. You didn't have anything wrong because we made it right. And the problem is, I have to excuse these gentlemen down here because they're better than I am, but most of us are really bad communicators. We don't know how to say things. Management doesn't know what we're talking about. I walk out and talk to vendors.
I can help you with that.
I talk to vendors out there, and I ask a couple of vendors, okay, what does this do? And they give me really great technical descriptions. I still don't know what it does.
Exactly.
So it's one of those things where we need to start being able to communicate so that people understand what we want in their language. And I would say, I'd have to object. I wouldn't say they need to be trained, management needs to be trained, because at that level, I don't think they're trainable anymore.
Right.
We need to be trained to speak their language.
Right.
Jim stole a little bit of my thunder. One of the things I was going to suggest, a very practical suggestion, but this is a very real suggestion. I think every person who is or aspires to be in management and information systems should take a sales course.
Absolutely.
Go out and take a sales course. There will be no better training, because what sales courses force you to do is to think like your customer. And you guys, the business is your internal customer. But the problem is, that I see all the time, is a lot of, and this is not just for IT, it's for a lot of the staff functions, you don't think like the people that in the business that have the real power. So let me give you a parallel, a real life parallel. I did an engagement with a very large organization, with their HR organization, because I'd gotten to know the chief HR officer, and he was bemoaning the fact that he just felt like, HR didn't really have a seat at the table. They don't take us seriously. And he was giving me examples of how they kept getting benefit cuts every year, and benefits wasn't taken seriously, and all they could be doing for the business. And I said, it's okay, let's talk about that for a little bit. And so what we ended up doing, to make a long story short, is we ended up doing an internal campaign on benefits, but it wasn't based on your every year annual open enrollment time. It was how benefits strategically can be used to make our products more competitive, to make the services we offer, the services that the company offered their customers more competitive. It immediately got the attention of the head of sales, and it immediately got the attention of the CFO. and they got their benefits budget increased significantly. And we did all this in 6 months. It could be something for information security. I mean, let me give you just one quick suggestion off the top of my head. I just thought about this a few minutes ago. You guys, why aren't you publishing an annual white paper with your position on some policy issue related to information security? Not just for your business. I mean, thought leadership for the general market, but that's coming from you guys. Your marketing people will love that. Right? So there are other things like that. You could do an internal newsletter, quarterly newsletter that goes out to every manager in your business, training them on some of these issues. But I think the come back to the main issue is you gotta tell your story, because nobody else is going to tell it for you.
Terry, do you have anything before? Because I want to be sure we get a chance, or if you just want to be quiet until we get you, we'll draw you out in a second.
No, just very briefly, I think there's no silver bullet. Everybody here has really real world, realistic feedback, and it's all correct. It's multidiscipline. The only thing I would add is what I see quite a bit at a time is that the CIO is in the executive room because they're pretty much there to see the technology opportunities relative to what's going on in the business that the other executives can't see, right? So that they're on that team to really figure out what is the business doing and how can technology help us. And so I think security oftentimes is seen as a cost center. Right. It's not seen as a business enabler. And yeah, it's not very strategic at times.
May I interrupt and ask you this question? Because one of the things we talked about yesterday in the program, Terry, was changing your vision of what your job is. Mm-hmm. And my comment is you are compliance and leadership people. And so often, the two things that surprise me is that the information security leaders and the doctors don't feel like they're leaders in the organization. And we tell them they are, and then we show them they are by simple things, and they get what they want done. So as part of what we need to do is to remind them that they're not there to do AV, they're there to lead. Is that what we need to be emphasizing here as in part?
Yeah, but I also think it's up to the individual to try to be an enabler and be aligned with the business than be a cost center. So I think some people, in information security kind of get designated to be thought of as a cost center because the things that they come and propose that they reduce risk, they're things that they should be doing. But at the end of the day, the executives at the top say, okay, that's great, I want to do that, but really focus on enabling the business. So can we do both at the same time? And so I think a lot of times you have to be very creative, be very plugged in with what the direction of the business is. Got to know the business. The number one thing is got to know the business, and you got to listen. You got to get engaged. You got to have those relationships. And at the end of the day, if you can provide, minimizing risk while enabling the business creatively where they hadn't previously thought of yet, I think that tends to get a lot of things moving forward.
Can I add something? And I don't want to keep you on. I'll be quiet after this, I promise. But a year and a half ago, I gave a presentation to the ISSA IAS group, and my whole presentation was, go into audit, it's a good career. If you go into security management, you're going to lose your job in 6 months. And the issue is there was no corporate value on security. The problem is with audit, there had been all these major events that happened that were embarrassed companies or cost companies money. But for security, it was invisible. Now we have Target and all those, this is your day. Yep. You want to make, hey, this is the time to stand up and say, we can solve your problems. For the first time, security management is being taken seriously by executive management. This is the time to show it because you have a very small window that stays open. Now, I promise
you have windows a lot of times, and I think that's true because you need to lay a foundation so that when that urgency comes, you can do two things, I think. One is, you can't sell compliance because you can't value compliance until something happens. So if you're good at it, I run that problem. People talk to me, how can I get them to buy this system? You have to look at those kinds of things. And I say, in theory, I'm in the compliance and risk management business, but the truth of the matter is until they're scared from their own situation or worried by somebody else's, it's difficult to get management to make the case. But you do have to have the constant stream of education, so it's a different part to do that.
Yeah, but even what you said, Cindy. So, because what I hear all the time, and this is particularly true for people in technology-related fields or who sell technology-related services and products. You said, how can I get people to buy this system? You're thinking about it wrong. If that's how you're thinking about it wrong. Here's what I tell people all the time. So Home Depot probably sold 250,000 or sold 1 million quarter-inch drill bits last year. Not one person who bought a quarter-inch drill bit wanted a quarter-inch drill bit. They all wanted a quarter-inch hole. Right?
Exactly.
You win by talking about the hole, not about the drill bit. And so you got to know you got to know the business. I mean, what keeps your CEO, not the CIO, not the CFO, what keeps your CEO up at night? And how can you tie what you do, no matter how many steps away, how can you tie what you do to that keeps that CEO up? That's how you go from the left side of the ledger, being a cost center, to the right side of the ledger, being a strategic business enabler.
Okay, now I have to do my part as the moderator because Jim, but what you see is how fun it is when we get started. Jim has been so patient because he always is.
No, actually, they said everything I was about to say, so that's good. No, but one thing we don't often see, we see lots of technical things in presentations, but we don't always bring in the finances, and the last two colleagues here just brought it up, but really it is important to talk in terms of finances. There was one time I won't name the health system, one time I was giving a presentation to the executive team because they didn't really have full disaster recovery and business continuity. So I think their annual revenue was $650 million. So, what is it going to cost you if you guys don't make a decision to make the investment to be able to ensure that the business stays up and running with a secondary data center with all the technical things that you need, because availability is one of the key tenets of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the HIPAA rule. And so anyway, that comes out to be $2 million a day you're going to be losing. So how many days of cash on hand do you have? Can you sustain that? So they were all, goodness, really? And so I think a lot of times if you can bring up the financial impact for either not doing something that is going to, and then add to it the impact level and maybe the likelihood of it happening. But they're intelligent people. They want to keep their job. They want to, the revenue of the organization is, when it gets right down to it, it's all about the finances. Because if an organization doesn't have money to stay afloat, they can't keep their doors open. So just an encouragement to add that in. That definitely gets people's attention if you can quantify the value of what of what you're trying to bring forth.
Well, and another dynamic, if we can explore a little bit, because we have a really unique and broad panel of people that talk to the C-level and talk about the roles and the responsibilities and the governance aspect. And this is a big part because different things come into play. We know that HIPAA and the PCI rules are FACTA, FINRA, all these other things are part of the federal sentencing guideline things, so the CEOs care a little bit about them. We know they go to the operational business realities. You got people, data, your process. That's really the primary things that companies operate on to produce the money. Those are their resources today. Then you've got the parties within. And you have their functional roles. And one of the things we talked about is whether, as leaders in IT and security, we should know that. But then you have these other people that have jobs. So you got the general counsel. We have the question that Eddie asked early that often comes up is who does security report to, who does privacy report to, what department they're in. That's oftentimes telling where the balance of power is. Then you have the risk management, and then you may have a compliance officer, and then you've got audit, and they all have to show they're smart and on top of things, and all of them, most organizations, want to control certain things and grow because it's a power thing. And so talking about that, I would be curious to hear how your organization and your experience addresses those allocations, where they go, and also how a couple of what you think are the best pointers for sort of bridging and rebuilding the bridges across those relationships to get the people on your team. And we'll start over here today now, because I know over.
That's a tough area, and I say it's a tough area because my company, UnitedHealth, has not grown organically. We've grown through about 100 acquisitions the last 10 years. So every time there's an acquisition, there's a new silo, and so a lot of what we do is try to show value in helping erase the silos when possible, or at least minimizing them from a management standpoint so that we can see standard metrics throughout. And so we can find out how we compare A with B with C It's a delicate situation when you have CIOs from each of these organizations that now they still have their CIOs, but they aren't. They've got the title. So you talk about politics. It's about treating people really well, and them knowing when you come with them, there's a real issue that can either help them or hurt them. It's to their benefit to listen.
Excellent. Eddie, do you got thoughts?
Yeah, this is vintage organizational dynamics, right? So the truth of the matter, I think, is you have to do three things at once. That's why I said part of it. That's why I said get the sales training. Part of it is you've got to do an internal sales job with other folks in other parts of the business, and the first thing you're selling is not your expertise. It's you. It's not your technical knowledge or whatever. You got to get people got to get a comfort level with you. The next thing you have to do is, I think that's why I say it's so incredibly important to have a deep understanding of the business, because the next thing you do is be able to articulate a point of view about information and information security, and how that will impact the future of the business in a way that the people you're trying to win over care about. That's the second. And the third one is kind of a crass one, but it's just the truth. A big part in today's, particularly in today's complex organizations, a big part of your success in breaking down these silos or these barriers, or at least dealing with them, is people need to perceive that you have more credibility in the C-suite. That people need to perceive that, look, is this somebody we really want to get crosswise with, if we can avoid it? And so I think you have to map out a strategy. And what that really is, and what I'm really talking about when you get right down to it, is you need a marketing plan for your function, an internal marketing plan, I think.
I'm going to pass over to the end users over here that really are livid.
Well, I just think...
you want somebody who knows what they're talking about to answer?
Well, I just think, from my perspective, that sometimes you run across managers and leaders that are trying to build their little empires, and they may just be very siloed in that regard, and so trying to break into it to get a common ground to move forward with some of the security initiatives. It's tough if they feel like they're threatened, if they're going to lose a piece of the pie. Yeah. So it is a challenge, and I have to say, Spencer and I, we've worked a couple times, and it does take some long-term strategy, because you can't chip away at it immediately. You can't just bulldoze in. You have to chip away at it slowly, and as my colleague says, build credibility along the way, that they see that you're not threatening them, that you do have some common ground, and if you can add value to them as well as find a way to do it together, you're trying to really build that relationship. I agree. It's tough.
Hard.
Jim?
Okay, just a couple quick thoughts. Just speaking of Kaiser Permanente, we have 38 hospitals. I think there's 10,000 people in the IT department. It's a rather large organization spread out for the most part, we're 80% in California, but all over the country. Lots of management, lots of executives. So it's very, very highly matrixed. But it all started out much like Cedars, is IT, that kind of thing. It all started out with individual departments, and in this case, in a multi-hospital system like Kaiser, it's multi-facilities kind of came together. So in some sense, there's a lot of regionality, that autonomy that's left there, but it's still all about developing those relationships. And in this of times of healthcare reform, we're all driving towards affordability. So I've seen Kaiser make some 180-degree turnaround decisions based on the Affordable Care Act, that can we really stay in business doing things the old way, where everybody, I'm not saying we did this, but leave no vendor behind. I mean, just any kind of technology, any vendor, let's bring them in, let's go ahead and we'll work with everybody. We've got to find a way to cut the costs. And so I think healthcare systems have to look to, what are we going to do to be able to be sustainable. So I think one rallying point, and I'll just share, that I know is happening in the organization I'm with right now is, it's really about what they're calling 1KP. It's, why are we here? Can we start doing things together? Can we all lobby behind something that's at the high level mission, vision, that kind of level? And I think that's something that resonates with people. A lot of people for healthcare, they get into healthcare because they just want to help people. It's about bettering people's lives. And so, you can get people to come together on those higher level themes. It's definitely a lot of work, but it kind of does start with, if people don't know why you're doing it, and you're not going to get them to join you. So it has to start there, then you can drop it down to more tactical efforts.
You want to?
Yeah, I want to focus a little more on the relationship building piece of it because, outside of the security arena in my scientific computing role, a lot of the researchers tend to function as if they're their own company. They get their own grant money. They're basically, that's their grant money. They spend it however they want, as long as it's used for the grant. So they're used to buying whatever they want, and so it's a matter of. And so when I first started working with them, it was like, okay, IT is just going to get in my way. So it took a lot of time to reach out to people, build the relationships, and show that you can add value. So fortunately, our CIO was generous enough to give me a big budget that I could use to subsidize storage and some other things that they really needed. So we used that as sort of an enticement to bring them into the fold. And so over time, that's worked. And so as new people come in, the old guard says, hey, check out Spencer's group. They can help you get stuff done. And so it's building that credibility takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of focus. But I think you apply that to security, and it's the same lessons that you...
And when Andy talks about marketing, and then Spencer talks about he knows what they need, what that strikes me as a point to have, which is, and it's a common marketing thing, but it's when we're trying to get our job done, a lot of times, even lawyers, we come in and we look like we're supposed to come in and tell you what to do, right? But a lot of times what happens is we come in and we tell you what to do. It's like, well, comply with the law, just don't break the law. Well, that's easy to give that advice, and I don't have a client that hires me saying I want to break the law and have a huge breach and have to do all this stuff. I've never had a client say, oh, please help me do that. But what we don't do is understand why people don't do things. We don't think about it. And a lot of times what happens is because we come in and told them that we need or require them to do this, and they don't do it. We assume that they're being obstructionist, we're being whatever. As somebody who is not in the litigation world, but is in the world of moving people forward to stability and then putting the pieces back together when things fall apart, I have to know why people do things and why they don't. And so most of what I start with, I really don't like it when people call me in and say, you need to hire Cindy to do this, or my firm go hire her. I like to kind of hang out with people for a while and hear what they operate with, because they tell me what their dreams, their needs, their wants, and their opportunities are in a non-threatening way. And then I can tell them how that fits in a way that's meaningful, and the outcome is always better. But in the urgency of our moment. Now, I would say the one exception to that is that when somebody is stealing data, there's a major breach, or Hurricane Katrina comes through, and we got to get 4,800 kidney patients out of Louisiana into Dallas, I'm not going to be bonding and saying kumbaya, but I think the urgency, or the sense of urgency, drives you to feel, I have to get this done today. And so turning to that, I'm going to throw a different trend here, is because I think a lot of times my profession creates this problem that says, as we are now, as I said yesterday, under the new guidance, as OCR said to me last week, if you have an unencrypted laptop in your organization today, there will be no forgiveness. Yet getting that done logistically and how you're going to do it is going to be a challenge. And so my thinking about an interesting thing I'd like to hear about you from is some things that provide timeline. And to buy time to move forward, your favorite trick to sort of go in, lay the thought, and move back, the waves in and out. And to lead off on this, I'm going to give you a comfort zone as a lawyer, okay? And that is, our policy is always to comply. But the risk assessment of HIPAA, FACTA, FINRA, whatever, says you have to do certain other things. So part of a job like mine is that many people don't communicate to you is to help you move to compliance or be prepared to show you're moving to compliance or that it wasn't your policy not to comply, but to help you know how to buy that time and tread water with your life vest long enough to get the job done responsibly. And those are some legal skills that can be taught. They're things that my people we have to teach, but my profession doesn't probably convey that to you in our sales pitch because we try to get your moment. Okay, there's a breach, do it now. But we can yell all we want. If the foundation isn't in place, even if you tried to execute, the sky will fall. So with that in mind, and since Terry's so patient and quiet, I'm going to ask him to jump out here first. Look at that. I would say, tell me what you think are some of the ways that you think you help to sort of do that ebb and flow to kind of evolve it to compliance and buy the time to sort of give people to understand the timelines and manage the timelines so that they're still receptive and you don't cut out the box underneath from you, but they keep moving forward.
Well, I think I'm in a different position. We're an analyst firm, so by the time we get in, it's either really early in the vision phase and it's not a problem, or they already know they have a big problem and they need somebody outside to come in. So I'm typically not in the phase where let's buy more time for something because it's either really too early or too late.
But they can't buy it all from us. They can only buy so much. So what we have to do is give them good enough.
Well, I think what I would comment on though is I think sometimes, you mentioned compliance and and security. One of the biggest mistakes that we see is that compliance doesn't equal security.
That's right.
Compliance, I think whether it's PCI particularly or HIPAA, people have been so busy trying to meet compliance, and there have been vendor after vendor out there selling compliance along, and security along with compliance, that somehow they've been equated as the same. And if I'm compliant, I'm secure. The reality is compliance is the minimum, right? That's the minimum of what you need to do. Your security program really comes down to your unique business, your unique risk, and then can you build a compliance program that actually incorporates that and reflects that? I think that's maybe how you actually buy more time, by just saying, look, we're not ticking the boxes, we're not just getting the feedback from the auditors, we actually have to make a policy that actually makes sense in our compliance, because there's a little bit of an art. You can actually comply with HIPAA in many different ways depending on what you deem your policy. There's a lot of flexibility in there. Some would argue too much, okay? And PCI, you look at Target, I don't even know how they were compliant, but somehow they had some latitude based on things that we know. But I think...
we still wait to see, but we'll see how that often
there's some things that we know.
Years now, but we hope.
Yeah. But I think buying time itself is probably going back to, let's try to make our compliance more meaningful to incorporate the needs of the business.
Well, and I think, let me just mention that, at least when we do compliance, there's big C compliance and there's little c compliance. And most people would think the law would be my big C compliance, but it's not. Operational compliance and integrity, getting your people, your process, and do things that you want it to do, is a fundamental element of compliance, and that's part of what you're talking about. So, in the CareWise case and the CVS cases, they, on the FTC side, which we never talk about at these conferences, but there's a separate settlement, and they were sued for deceptive trade practices by the FTC, my former partner Richard Feinstein, and they, and what it was is they said, we care about your privacy. And then they didn't do anything to implement the care about the privacy, okay? And yet, we care about your privacy is probably an essential element to anybody's business model in the place, and I think it goes to that point. And so what you are, when you talk about compliance, lawyers are not, and the laws are not the only compliance you care about. And that's really what your theme is it's what I call big C compliance, which is corporate compliance, operational compliance. And to think beyond that, and that's really kind of part of your message today, isn't it? That your culture of compliance includes not just legal compliance, but operational compliance.
I think you distilled it down a little bit better than I did.
Yeah, it's to that mission. So with that in mind, if we could just, I don't know, I think if we can continue along that theme and think about these ideas of how we buy time and selling it, because that is the challenge, and then defending it in the meantime and hoping that the one laptop that hasn't been encrypted doesn't get, hacked. What's your favorite tip?
I think when you originally asked the question, I was thinking from more operational, more tactical. And I don't know if the Bandaid is the right word, but maybe we start at a lower, less secure state to get to the control we really want to get to. We will try to address it in what can we implement in the short run to kind of help mitigate it. It may not be at the big C compliance level that we want. The policy may not be firmly set. And we may have to kind of document some sort of assessment statement that says we're here, but we are planning and moving towards this direction. But we try to go in the short run, what can we do now with what we've got, and plan for where we want to be while we're building that time in. So,
I want to take a minute to just reiterate what she said. They do this short stop. They basically do a risk assessment. They do a short stop Band-Aid, what we can do while they're moving to compliance. When you go back and you look at the 3 latest settlements and they're talking about the risk assessment and you look at the process they're documenting, what you're telling me is that you're living the model.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're doing with what we can, with what we're trying to be integrity minded. We're trying to implement, and we're not trying to stop. We're trying to go with what we can go with.
And I think that's so important because it goes back to the theme that we just had too, that business operations and compliance are they're a different terminology, and compliance is a component of operation, but they go hand in hand, and legal risk is just one of the risks.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Just one of the risks. And if you pulled out all the plugs and rebuilt the plane in the air, patients would die.
It's much like what Spencer mentioned, the viruses and things. We have to maybe unplug the one, but we haven't solved the problem from an enterprise perspective. So what do we need to do in the short run? And then what do we need to do long-term planning to fix it overall? So that's kind of our methodology.
Excellent. That's just, I haven't heard anybody actually talk as succinctly about what they're doing as well as you've just said that. That's amazing.
Just to build on what Brenda said, I look back, and as we were talking about this, I was thinking about our strategy towards encrypting laptops. We had that one stolen laptop, and so my favorite phrase is stop the bleeding. So the first thing we did was make sure we got a policy in place that says we encrypt all laptops, and then we said as of July 1st, every laptop that's purchased will be encrypted, and then we outlined a plan that says, okay, we're going to encrypt every 10 laptops a day for the next X number of months until we hit 100%. Mm-hmm. And so that was the staged approach we took.
That's excellent. Jim, do you have anything you want to? We'll go down to.
Yeah, so piggybacking on my 2 colleagues here. So I think the nice thing in healthcare, you are dealing with patient safety and patient lives, so you can't just stop and do a 5-year plan. And you do have to kind of put your finger in the hole in the dam. But the good thing is you can also, in parallel, start the more long-term strategic plan related to security and risk. So if there isn't ongoing assessments, if there isn't regular quarterly vulnerability scans, if there isn't a security program in place, based on some of the frameworks that are out there, then there's no reason why you can't start that at the same time. So you can have multiple things going on, because ultimately, if you pass an audit, that doesn't mean anything. You just pass the audit, you did the minimum, but you really need to be able to have assurance and assure the upper management that you're going to be able to continue to sustain that level. So that requires some formalized program that's supported by the very top leaders, and you have to, as we've been talking about, kind of sell that to them. So really, I think it's both need to be done. It does take time. Change is difficult. People don't like it. One of the unique things in healthcare that I've noticed, and I think anybody in healthcare would probably say the same, is particularly in California, physicians are. Except for those that are in academic medical centers, where they can be faculty, they work for themselves or another group. So the hospitals don't really own them per se. So you can't really tell them what to do. You can kind of encourage them. You got to work with them. You have to be, their trusted partner. And they're the ones that generally they're the key stakeholders that are driving to make it easier, make it fast. I want to be able to use Dropbox. They're the ones that have the high requirements. So those are the people that you really need to be working on those relationships with to get them to buy into that overall long-term plan so that they'll kind of play ball. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good point. Eddie, as we turn to Eddie and Eric, Eddie it's 2 different perspectives in a certain sense, because Eric's here with an audit background, and Eddie comes as the person who was the chair of the audit committee for the board of one of the largest public hospitals. So from that perspective, it would be interesting, and I know I've heard Eddie on this topic some, as to hear, Eddie, from a board's perspective, as the audit chair, what you want to hear and what you want to see in bridging to that and how you approach that. And then Eric, as you follow on after that from the audit chair, how you can help with the bridging of those questions on the other side and move that forward.
Yeah, just for historical perspective, for those of you who don't know, about, I guess, almost 4 years ago now, CMS came in and did a surprise inspection at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, the safety net urban hospital. 875 beds, all full every day, 500 people a day in the emergency room. So, million patient visits a year. Came, did surprise inspection, found a lot of problems. Come to find out, they and the state had done a series of inspections in the previous few years before that. Not good results. The board was not made aware of a lot of this. A previous board resulted in with CMS essentially, coming in and doing with a gap analysis that basically said patients are in a number of ways in immediate jeopardy, and it was an existential threat to the institution.
In other words, they were going to shut them down.
Stop paying.
Well, yeah, because so when you lose 70% of your revenue, if you lose your Medicaid funding and that 70% of your revenue, you're out of business. Six of the 7 board members had been on when this happened. Had been on the board for a grand total of 60 days. We didn't know where the bathroom was. And also, in
other words, Eddie was on the board.
And so we get confronted with this. Anyway, make a long story short, to fast forward, if I encapsulate, I mean, it was 3 years of really, really tough slogging, somewhere north of $80 million in cost to fix things, and massive staff change out at the top. And but if I have to encapsulate the what I think is it's probably the smartest thing we did, it was because what the regular they don't want to shut you down, right? But particularly at the point where it becomes a major media and political issue, what they need to see is a change in philosophy, a change in culture. And so part and parcel of that, one of the easiest ways to do that, and this was I'll tell you, it was just, I am not a falsely modest person, but this was dumb luck. I chaired the IT committee when I first came on the board because nobody else wanted it, but the previous to my coming on the board, I asked for the minutes of the previous IT committee meetings, and the IT committee had met, I think, twice in 3 years. And so I said, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to meet at least every other month, and at every meeting, one of the things we're going to review, because attended to all the myriad issues that we had. A lot of those issues surrounded Epic and how it wasn't being used. Well, the way we had done the implementation and had done a bunch of carve-outs for people who didn't want to comply with certain things, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, okay, we're going to get reports on this every other month. And as part and parcel of that report, at the end of the meeting, you, Miss CIO, and you, Mr. CFO, who the CIO reported to, are going to attest to me and the other 2 board members on this committee that we either fixed these things or tell me where in the process we are toward fixing them. And I can say this now. There was a hue and cry from inside saying, we can't do that in these meetings. These meetings are public. And my point was, exactly. Exactly. After 2 of those meetings, the regional director of CMS told me personally that, thank you for doing this. This gives us a whole lot more comfort. That part of the issue went away pretty quickly. So it's kind of what people here. It's kind of what people here are talking about. It's as I say when I do crisis communications with people, people will forgive an honest mistake. But they want to know you're serious about fixing it, and you're not covering things up.
And I'm pretty much in a whole different world. In that, I've been in front of the board a couple times. All the businesses know that I can get them money. I can go in front of the budget committee, and I know what words to say to them to get the extra $2 to $3 million some app needs to comply. When we talk compliance, we're not talking about HIPAA, SOX, PCID, TRICARE. We don't talk about that stuff. We talk about compliance to controls. And the controls are all managed to handle each one of these other things. So we never talk about a compliance to PCI. We talk about compliance to controls. When an application comes back and says, we don't have the money to do it, and that's classic, I say, okay, tell me what you need. I'll get you the money. To which they say, we don't have time. And then I go to the segment IT owner and say, not a problem. You don't have to do this. I need your signature that you're personally accepting the risk. Of course, they're never going to do that. And so we get it resolved because I just take away their excuses. And I just have a...
You're mean.
It comes down to relationships. The budget committee knows I will only come to them when something has to get done. And so it all comes down to taking away excuses. There's one other thing, and I think Kaiser really has a really good part of this. When we talk about culture, there's one thing that they're really instilling in us because we're big on culture right now, and that's assume good intent. We have 110,000 employees, 15,000 IT employees, and everyone at one time thought everything I'm being asked for is because you hate me. Yeah. Now we're really trying to push assume good intent. They mean well what they're asking. So use that as a starting place. It's made a huge difference.
Well, we know now that audit is absolutely indispensable in our team. And we've got about 10 minutes left. So I want to go back to the building of the team, and also, questions. If you have one, if you want to talk to the panel, stand up so that we know you want to. Because absolutely, let's get you your questions, because that's the cool part of this, and then give us the feedback. So, do you all have some questions from the panel about what your tough stuffs are? Because that's one of the great things about being part of an ISSA or a HIMSS, a professional organization. It's not just the programs you sit in, but I always say it's the Sunday school too, right? It's the ability to have the relationship that you can sit down at the table and mentor each other. So do any of you all have some things that you'd like to share or ask the panel about? Because it's pretty awesome. Go ahead.
I have been an IT professional for a long time. I'm very familiar with HIPAA since its inception over 10 years ago. However, recently we have had a dilemma that has raised some uncertainty questions. We are looking for a so-called HIPAA compliant web hosting company. What do we trust or identify them? Do we just Google them and see if they say I am HIPAA compliant? Is there a list of compliance criteria that we have to verify? Is there a certificate that they need to show us? What identifies a hosting company as a HIPAA compliant company?
Well, I'll just start by telling you that you should take the Office of Civil Rights IT Audit Checklist, which is not completely updated, and ask them to complete the checklist and certify that they're compliant. It's free on the website. They're going to open it up, and we're in the process of helping them update it for the High-Tech Act things. But I would include that in every RFP, but I'm curious about what you all would do.
Well, I'm curious. At your point, have you identified the matches between what your compliance needs are for your business, or do you not have the personnel in-house to do that?
Well, the compliance needs are a different dimension of this whole story. For now, we are just looking for someone who said, because it's an outside company,
Okay, and from that, what I would say is before you look for the outside company, I think you need to get a set of requirements that you need. Maybe you need to bring in a consultant or someone who's highly trained to come in and find out where the compliance requirements for HIPAA intersect with your business. And from that standpoint, then you'd have a list of requirements you could go to vendors for. I'm terrified to go to a vendor without a list of requirements because they will sell me on stuff I never need.
Yeah, it's kind of, you need an RFP. That's what you need. And that's really what you're talking about, is building an RFP. And one of those elements on HIPAA compliant, because what are you going to say? No, we're not HIPAA compliant? I mean, this is the thing about cloud servers, right? They're saying, well, we're a cloud server. And the business associate regs say, we don't care if you know you're a business associate, you are. And so they're going to try to sell to you, but what their definition of HIPAA compliant and what your need for HIPAA compliance is depends on what data you're going to put up on the website, what features you're going to put in there. And to me, the money needs to be spent on that. I'm telling you, the standards of legal compliance and documentation of your prudent selection, the cheapest way I know to do that is to just go to the website and get the checklist and say you have to certify with that, and then also add a question that says, now also address what you've done for High Tech Act to update that. That's a cheap solution. If you type in HIPAA Privacy Office of Civil Rights and then look at tools, you'll find their audit checklist.
One of the litmus tests I use for a really quick way of weeding that out is I ask the company, will you sign a HIPAA business associate agreement? If they say yes, then we can talk. If they say no, we're done.
But I'm going to tell you, even if you sign the HIPAA business associate agreement, what scares me to death is that they sign them, and that's all they do. They say, we will comply, and when you go look, they're not. And what we know from last week, for example, when I was with OCR, is that the most frequent and most difficult breaches are at the business associate level. They all say they're compliant, and almost none of them have any operating structure.
Don't you still need to perform due diligence to ensure that they're at least showing a modicum of compliance? A signature by them is one thing, but if you don't try to perform any due diligence, aren't you still going to be held responsible?
Well, you are, and you have
anyway.
Basically imputed liability for your business associates, and if you haven't done your part, then I think they're going to do it. But if it looks there and they've misrepresented or whatever, then OCR says that that's the case. But I think, again, when you go to the bigger business operating need and you go to the other laws like the state laws and the liability laws and, the who's going to pay for the cleanup, just to survive with your board, your shareholders, your stakeholders if you're a public organization, and certainly your leadership proposition, those things are no different. That's just good business practice. And I think that sometimes, and I want to thank you for asking that question, because it really illustrates that there's a place that we come up in different disciplines, and there's a certain role function. But when you get into these functions, there are different skills, like how do you write an RFP, what really should go in a business associate, how do you negotiate a contract, how do you get, if they say no, but they're the only option, how do you document that's prudent, how do you convince management? These are skill sets that are part of the evolution, just like compliance grows. And the fact that you don't know them today, because it hasn't fallen into your realm of trial by fire yet, is probably one of the reasons that's a hot button to develop. But those are things that I think as we come to the conference and we do the planning, we invite you to share with us, and we invite you to recognize that that's part of the process of moving from the administrative role to the leadership role that you're in and to growing in those areas. And what's great is you do have professional people here. So we've got about, a minute or two, a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes left. So Brenda, I see you thinking.
For some vendors where I'm kind of curious on their controls, we've embedded in our business associate agreement the external party risk assessment, and it's clearly about 11 to 12 pages of questions that I ask a vendor, which I know they think they're just going to sign an agreement and send it back until they get to that section. Mm-hmm. And then they are calling me saying, what is this? And I'm like, well, I'm asking about your controls on your application. And I even ask, in terms of, is it being hosted at Cedars or are you hosting it? And then I'm very specific on the controls, and is our data going to be going outside the United States? And I get very specific because I need to have some assurance of the risk to Cedars information, particularly if I'm going to exchange it with them. And additionally, I'll also ask them if there's any other documents they'd like to send me up front, a SAS 70 report, something that certifies that they've gone through their own risk assessment. If they share that up front, I'm more than willing to really look at them. And if I, get a sense that they're hedging, then that's probably not a product I want to go with. But what I also flush out in this external party risk assessment is a lot of the times that, because we have a lot of departments and divisions, and they're the ones that's the primary sponsor or business contact for this vendor, is they'll start telling me this is who we're doing business with, and then when I'm talking with them on the phone, I find out they're actually going to be giving it to a subcontractor. And suddenly it starts getting webbed. And so this external party risk assessment kind of fleshes that out as well. And then when they find out that they need a BA with that party, and they didn't know that. And so it becomes important to ask the questions. And one of the things in terms of changing that culture around that Spencer and I encourage is for managers to start asking the hard questions and consider it your own data. Would you be willing just to give off your information to someone without asking how they're treating it and how they're hosting it and how they're securing it? I certainly wouldn't be comfortable. So I'm finding the culture very willing to work with us and filling that, and most of the vendors to work through that whole risk assessment. I think they're getting a sense of peace of mind of how they need to even develop in their products more controls. It's been eye-opening, I think, for them. But
well, I know we're out of time, and I know we have another program. I want to thank the panel and thank all of you, and particularly thank them because, again, they're very brave to come up here and let me just randomly ask them questions. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I do, and I hope that those of you that have enjoyed the day today will share that back with them, and also consider the leadership committee, Bo and the team work really hard to try to bring a good program, and they work really hard, and the speakers come really hard to try to give the best. But out of these things, there's going to be feedback. And we want you to give us the feedback, but more importantly, consider getting involved and volunteering to help plan one of those programs because they are working really hard to bring things meaningful to you. And the more you tell us, the more they can bring you good stuff. So thank you for your time, and thanks for letting me have the ability to ask the questions today. You guys have a great rest of the conference.
Good job, you guys.